I'm not even going to start with the normal haha joke, then into what the video's about. Just, what's up with the little arm? Like, Steve isn't here for this video because real life is cruel and awful, but we were both stumped for quite a while about this because, like, firstly, the clans don't exactly do melee unless they're really desperate, so hands with functioning actuators are pretty rare. The second reason mechs have arms is to stand up. If they're expecting to get knocked over, then the arms help them stand up again and balance. Like, the rifleman doesn't have any arms because it's a fire support mech. If explosions, impacts, or shocks are knocking it over, something's already gone horribly wrong. But this random little arm is so small to help the mech stand back up, it doesn't have a proper upper arm actuator either, so it's doubtful that it even could assist in standing back up. And once again, the clans don't do melee, so like, why? Why is this arm here? We pondered this for like an hour and came to the entirely inarguable position that this arm is there for purely egotistical reasons. It's the high five arm. You high five other mechs and other mech warriors, or you give them a thumbs up when they do well, or you give some random infantryman the finger before you step on him. The little high five arm is now canon. Disagreements are meaningless, and Sarna shall be bullied into changing the lore. That is all. As for what we're actually talking about, if it wasn't obvious, the shadowcat. Normal affair. Lore, stats, function, etc., etc. Before we get into things, though, introductions. Generic greetings and welcome to Science Insanity, a channel where I talk about nerd stuff and convince you to waste your time listening to it. Normally, I ask at the end, but I really want to hit 40k subs by October since that would be the perfect time to introduce 40k, the final boss of science fiction, and celebrate the Green Lads through Orktober. That aside, I do hope you enjoy the video because I plan on earning that sub, and on to the actual content. Clan mechs are usually a bit of a different beast than Inner Sphere mechs because they don't really develop or evolve like Inner Sphere mechs do. You can track how something like the Locust changed over time as you see new tech and redesigns being produced. Oh, this one has TSM, that one has mask, this one's got an XL engine and pulse lasers, this one runs at the speed of sound, more and more and more, you get the idea. But since most clan mechs use Omnipod technology, you can't really do that. Pretty much any possible loadout of weapons that can fit within an arbitrary amount of tonnage are possible, so as soon as the situation changes, they just throw new weapons in there while the Inner Sphere needs to develop an entirely new chassis with new internals. So for the most part, the details and interesting bits are about why clan mechs were built, who wants to use them, and how they actually work on the battlefield, rather than how they were developed and changed over the years. So why don't we start with the first question there? Why was the shadowcat built? Well, quite simply because it was meant to be better than its predecessor and more capable of heavy fighting. And that's actually another interesting quirk of clan mechs. They are built and thrown out incredibly fast. The time between when the shadowcat went into production, roughly the year 3000-ish, so turn of the millennium, and its predecessor, the Ice Ferret, was only 50 years. Since the clans actually have the technology and industry to constantly keep building newer, better machines and replacing old ones, they do. Meanwhile, in the Inner Sphere, the same bog-standard medium has been in service for 500 years with no signs of slowing down or stopping production. So a large part of the Shadowhawk's history and design boils down to better than the Doom Fridge. The other major part of the Shadowcat was that it was designed for Operation Revival, what the clans called their invasion of the Inner Sphere. The Ice Fridge was a good scout mech, matching the Locust's speed of 130 kph, but sporting double the armor and more than triple the weapons tonnage. The only downside is that those weapons weren't particularly good at actually fighting things. Fridge ferrets need to work in groups in order to take down larger mechs, since their firepower was long range but not exactly hard hitting. It was sufficient for a medium scout mech. But believing that they would be facing the entire Inner Sphere, having a mech that needed to work in groups to be truly effective wasn't seen as a good idea when you could instead have a star of 5 mechs, for example, that were all independently scary as hell. Thus, the Shadowcat was born. Some trade-offs were made, however, in exchange for carrying the hardest-hitting, longest-range weapons the clans had at the time. The Shadowcat traded off speed from its predecessor and a small but notable amount of armor. To make up for this, the Shadowcat had far more complex internals that compensated for the loss in mobility, but also made it far more expensive and maintenance-heavy compared to the Fridge. When the mech finally came up against the Inner Sphere, used by most of the clans, but only in truly large numbers by its creator clan, Novacat, the shadowcat proved to be a goddamn menace because of its main weapon, a clan Gauss rifle, as well as the monstrously superior clan sensor and fire control tech. Shadowcats were monstrously lethal on the battlefield. The first and many times only thing an Inner Sphere mech warrior would know of a shadowcat being on the field was when Gauss slugs started impacting around or in their cockpit. In many cases, however, since clanners pretty much never operate alone, the opening volleys of supersonic shots only signaled the oncoming hail of fire from slightly closer range mechs. Fun fact about its effectiveness: a lot of people who only ever play tabletop or the video games won't really grasp how deadly the combo of mobility, low profile, massive punching power, and laser accurate fire control systems are. Oh, sure, everybody can kind of guess, and I'm pretty sure everybody's run into situations like that where they just cannot compete against an objectively superior mech, but it doesn't really sink in, you know? Well, the Shadowcat doesn't actually have an Inner Sphere designation. The Timberwolf is called the Mad Cat, the Summoner is called the Thor, the Ice Fridge is called the Fenris, but, you know, the Shadowcat, nope, no Inner Sphere name. And that's because before the Battle of Tukiad, where they were actually destroyed and studied and Comstar could actually figure out what the hell they were, no one ever saw them to identify them on the battlefield, and those that did encounter them never survived to tell the tale. It literally killed everyone that ever came across it. That's how deadly and effective this thing actually was. And I mean, who would have thunk, I guess? Headshotting people from outside their vision range like you're farming NPCs in a stealth game is a pretty overpowered strategy. Mixes well with the shadow part of its name, huh? Over the years, however, the Shadowcat would gradually be phased out of production in clan space. The exact reason was unknown, but it's probably more clan-headed garbage about honor or Zelbringen or being as dumb as possible, because the creating clan, the ones who did pretty much all the production, Clan Novacat, got evicted and forced to move to the Inner Sphere during the Wars of Reaving. They got evicted because they had the stupendously un-clan-like idea that maybe invading the entire Inner Sphere was a bad idea and they should be less warlike. Or in other words, they joined the Warden clans. So it's likely that the other clanners went, ew, dishonorable mech, and just stopped using it the same way that the Caretans go, ew, media mechs, for most of their history. The Caretans are the worst faction. In the clan homeworlds, however, the Shadowcat functionally disappeared as no new production was taking place and attrition took its toll. Ultimately, by 3070, the Shadowcat ceased to exist outside of the Inner Sphere. But baby, did it thrive with the spheroids. You want to know why? Mr. Krabs, take us away.
Money!
Clan Diamond Shark, I think, renamed Sea Fox again by this point. They changed their name like 3 times, don't worry about it. But Clan Diamond Shark were the merchant clans. They did the big business. They had universal suffrage and relative equality. They were some of the most commercial of all the clanners. They were the money clan. This is Clan Moneybags. While Novacat did produce and sell the mech, Clan Moneybags eventually took over during a stint where the factory exploded, as they do in Battletech, and from then on produced the thing as fast as possible. From the years 3080-ish on to the current date in Battletech's lore, the Shadowcat was produced and used as a reliable, highly effective, fast reaction and fire support medium. With a great balance of firepower, durability, and utility, it found itself in use by everyone who wanted to buy it, which was everyone. There isn't much more to talk about, unfortunately, when it comes to its development or history, though, since it's pretty empty. Basically just, Shadowcat exists, many other mechs stop existing when it looks at them, Shadowcat is then bought by everyone who can, because see sentence prior. So let's move on to the stats of the mech and the kind of gear that it carried. We'll start with the Prime version of the mech, or the default loadout, and talk about some of the Omnipod variants that have been produced and finished off with an explanation of why it was so damn effective in combat. Weighing in at 45 tons, the Shadowcat is in a really strange place. For any other Inner Sphere mech warrior, like, the 40 to 45 ton curse is very, very real. Any mech in this category often struggles since they barely have more protection and firepower than light mechs, but are slower and often more vulnerable since they're huge. Imagine just the Vulcan, There you go. That's what the 45-ton curse basically describes. But for clan mechs with their cheat technology, that curse goes away. The shadowcat is fast, heavily armored, well armed, and even sporting a few advanced combat computers and utilities. Its default loadout gives the mech a gauss rifle in the right arm, supported by 2 extended range medium lasers in the side torsos. Alone, this is pretty good for a 45-tonner, but the shadowcat also has an active probe. For anyone that doesn't know, an active probe is a separate system of electronic warfare systems and sensors that counteract stealth, camouflage, and masking techniques that try to hide an enemy mech. It also dramatically enhances the targeting systems by providing more accurate targeting data at a significantly longer range than normal gear would. In games and stuff, it's pretty god-awful. Like, it just increases sensor range or reduces enemy ECM effects by a little bit, but in lore this thing is actually cracked. The difference between not seeing an enemy mech in woods or foliage and being able to take their cockpit off at 2 kilometers range is very noticeable. The active probe is a massive force multiplier for a mech that carries it. Like, it's difficult to understate. Honestly, it deserves an entire video on combat computers and sensors and stuff in Battletech, because they're nuts. They're some techno wizardry. Enabling the loadout to actually be effective, however, is the Shadowcat's mobility. Equipped with a 270 rating Clan XL engine, the Shadowcat can run at an impressive 100 kph normally, but with the addition of Mask, can top out at around 130 for short bursts, meaning despite being more than double the size, the Shadowcat can match the Locust. Even more, however, is the fact that the Shadowcat comes equipped with jump jets, enough to allow it to vault 180 meters at a time and do so in rapid succession with little heat buildup, because clan tech is cheating. Protecting the mech is 7 tons of ferrofibrous armor, only a little bit less than the max that this chassis tonnage can carry. All in all, the prime version of the mech is fantastic. It hits hard, moves fast, sees you through cover and stealth, and has the tankiness to shrug off a pretty good amount of damage. It's a great mech. And honestly, while I normally think of most of the alternate versions of mechs as a mix of bad, good, kind of weird, most of the Shadowcat's variants are similarly great. When I throw out random letters, by the way, that's the Omnipod setup, so if I say like version C, that's Shadowcat Omnipod Loadout C. So the A variant swaps out the Gauss and medium lasers for twin ER large lasers and a Streak SRM6, retaining the active probe. And I really like this version, since firstly, I'm not a fan of a main weapon being ammo dependent. Sorry, hunchbacks. So boating 2 clan larges is both a lot of firepower, but it's also got better endurance at the cost of slightly worse range than the default loadout. The Streak SRM gives it a hell of a punch against light mechs, proto-mechs, battle armor, and vehicles. I honestly think this might be the best version that the Shadowcat has, since its lasers are universally good, and the SRM gives it a nice punch at close range if it ever gets caught out by the few things fast enough to chase it down. Then we have the D version, which is aptly named because it's coming to give you the D. This is what I can only describe as the fuck it we brawl loadout of the mech, and honestly, this is voodoo magic, okay? If you described this loadout on an inner sphere mech, I'd say it'd have to be a heavy minimum, like 75 tons. The Shadowcat D screams onto the battlefield with a single long-range weapon, an extended range large laser in the arm, and supplementing this is 3 medium pulse lasers spread across the mech's components, a Streak SRM6, because of course, why wouldn't you? That thing is basically insta-gib for any power armor, 2 machine guns, and remember, mech-scale machine guns are closer to the autocannons you see in modern-day IFVs, but faster firing, an extra anti-pigeon laser, because of course, and enough ammo and heat sinks to allow the mech hours of endurance in a fight. It's just all of the weapons. Like, this is such a ludicrously over-the-top loadout for a medium mech that's 45 tons. This is a very scary loadout to run into if you are piloting a similarly weighted machine. God, Clantech is just cheating. And then we have a Dark Age mech variant, which I personally really like, and I figured I would share because it's just really funny. The Shadowcat F. Oh boy, an ERPPC in one torso, already a powerful, very long-range weapon, backed up by yet another Streak SRM6 for close range. This weapon is just everywhere in Clan Mechs, probably because it slaps way harder than it has any right to and is just ludicrously weight efficient for the damage it does, so yeah, it shows up everywhere as a support weapon. And oh yeah, the main weapon! It's not the ERPPC. You'd think, because it fits the profile of a really big energy weapon or something in the right arm, but nope, the main weapon is a T-Semp. And you might be wondering, what is a T-Semp cannon? Sigh, I've never heard of this. Well, a tight stream electromagnetic pulse cannon is essentially a super specialized PPC. Except instead of firing a glob of supercharged particles that interferes with electronics when it hits and melts through something, the T-Semp fires a continuous beam that can paralyze an enemy mech if it's small, or seriously fuck with its ability to fight back if it's big. Well, you might ask, what does a T-Semp look like when it's firing? Is it a flamer, but blue and lightningy like a PPC? Nope, it's just force lightning. It's described as a mech-scale taser without the need for wires. The shadowcat can cast force lightning on enemies. It can also force jump because clan jump jets. And it can also force sprint when it needs to because of mask. The shadowcat is a Sith. The shadowcat is the Senate, and nobody will convince me otherwise. I know that there are some artists out there as well that watch me. I've got some fan art before. Please, I beg, if you're listening, someone draw the Shadowcat wearing Sith robes and, like, electrocuting a Locust or Irby or something. That would be the absolute funniest shit to see ever. And that brings me to the end of the video, or the last section of the video, I should say, why the mech works so well. And honestly, it's really simple. A lot of people put too much stock in armor or firepower when they make their ridiculous mech builds, but accuracy, mobility, and consistency are king. The Shadowcat has the accuracy, sensor strength, and mobility to always start fights on its terms, picking the time, location, and direction of attack, and being fully able to reposition or escape before enemies can react. And since most of its loadouts have the ability to slap the shit out of you with its initial strike, it's not uncommon for Shadowcats to inflict genuinely crippling damage on an enemy before retreating. Its jump jets let it move around the urban sprawl faster and easier than a mech of its size should, and the Omnipods let it swap out from multiple highly effective brawling builds, from SRMs and pulse lasers to LBXs and ATMs. Alongside mechs like the Timberwolf, I genuinely think the Shadowcat is arguably a perfect mech. Not perfect in the way that it's like the best, but perfect in the way that it just straight up doesn't have any weaknesses of note. It's got a weapon for every situation, a plan for any battle, and a tool for every problem. And since clan tech is cheating, its tools, weapons, and plans are usually a shitload more effective than any Innersphere counterpart. Clan tech is cheating. And of course, there are some flaws that you could point out with it, like 45-ton mechs generally not having the best survivability because of low armor, or not having the greatest utility in their weapons, like they can only carry a couple of them, but it's not really a weakness because every single other mech that has that weakness at around 40-45 tons, they suffer it way worse, and the Shadowcat kinda doesn't. And that brings me functionally to the end of the video. I've got nothing else to say, but before we fully close out, if you've made it this far, you're clearly the target audience, so why not leave a like, subscribe, ring the bell, all that stuff, since it helps the channel out and notifies you when future content is released. If you're feeling particularly generous, Psy also has a Patreon where you can throw money at my Staying Alive fund. Or if you just want to hang out, Psy has a Discord full of fellow turbo nerds, and I stream on Twitch every weekend, and sci-fi and mech related stuff, mostly. To all the people already supporting the channel, though, a huge thanks to the arms dealers supplying all the toys and tools you've seen in today's video. I had great fun electrocuting people and flying around while roleplaying as Darth Sidious. Thanks to the food merchants making sure that starvation is an ever far away threat, and to the coffee vendors fueling my war on sleep. One day I shall never sleep again. And to the new guys, recent joiners, Flippy Burgers, Josh Saderholm, Blizzard 4337, and Dykale. I appreciate the support, guys, quite a bit. Thank you very much for signing up. And with that, the video's over. I have nothing else to say. Outros are hard. Goodbye!